At Harris Hospital, 5 people are being treated. The names of 3 have been released. Nurses say some were burned. Others suffered from broken bones.
Most of them had a lot of broken bones, lots of lacerations. Most of them went to Parkland with burns. Most of them are stable now.
74-year-old Sidney Siegel is in critical condition tonight with third-degree burns over 35% of his body. Andrea Goodkid, whose age has not been released, is in fair condition. She has a fractured leg and some soft tissue injuries. A third person, Paul Koch, was also burned. He is in serious condition. And hospital officials say they have had more than enough help from medical volunteers.
We did have at least 10 or 12 physicians, and the staff I couldn't give you numbers on, but we had more than enough.
Were you pleased with the volunteers?
Very pleased with the response, very pleased with the action.
How about the general public? Have you had people come in saying they want to give blood?
I understand we have about 35 or 40 volunteers willing to donate blood downstairs in our cafeteria.
There were some reports many of the victims had been evacuated by air to Carswell Air Force Base, but officials there say they have received no patients from the crash. John McKay, Channel 8 News, Fort Worth.
Can you tell us what you saw, where you were when all this happened?
I was headed west on 114, and the rain was so hard you couldn't see 30 foot in front of you. And all of a sudden, it seemed like just caught a tire, a glimpse of a tire, and a big jolt just bounced my car. I pulled over and trying to gain myself, and I got out and walked over toward this other car, and saw the guy had been taken out of it, and he was like 30 foot from his car. He was decapitated, and I don't know, it just still trying to gather everything right now. I can't believe it happened.
So his car, did the plane hit your car
Yes.
and then hit his car?
Yes.
What happened? Did you see anything after that?
I turned back and I saw just like a big explosion right over there, the ball of fire and the mushroom cloud.
Any sign of life coming from that in terms of anybody running from the plane or anything like that?
None whatsoever.
Okay. How bad did the situation get out here? We see several smashed cars.
As far as I know, my car and the other car over here is the only one that got hit. The other wrecks are just vehicles themselves hit each other.
So the one man you say is an apparent fatality would be the only casualty out here as far as motorists. Is that right, as far as you know?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
Rescue workers poured into the scene minutes after Delta Flight 191 went down. They rushed to remove a handful of stunned and terrified passengers from the remains of the charred jumbo jet.
We had a water tower. I think it was a wind shear. Did you see any lightning? No.
But in the words of one official at the scene, there were far more who died tonight on Flight 191 than survived. In all, about 20 people were taken to area hospitals for treatment. Rescue workers carefully moved the rest, putting their bodies on stretchers and taking them a distance from the main crash site. According to officials, the Delta jet was en route nonstop from Fort Lauderdale to DFW Airport and was to go on to Los Angeles. Delta officials say 166 passengers and 11 crew members were on board. A heavy thunderstorm and frequent lightning were underway as the L-1011 headed for its final approach from the north end of the airport when it exploded. Officials say it may have been hit by lightning, or perhaps it hit a wind shear which smashed it to the ground. The jet apparently hit the ground on the north side of Highway 114, striking several cars as it passed over the highway. Then it clipped a huge water tower and came to rest several hundred yards beyond. It left behind a swath of debris and death. Hundreds of rescue workers, police, ambulance crews, and fire departments rushed to the crash scene. Care Flight helicopters also carried the injured to 5 area hospitals. For some time, firefighters poured water on debris that burned and smoldered. Several hours after the crash, solemn Delta officials called a news conference to answer questions about the tragedy.
It got out of Fort Lauderdale on time at 4:10 this afternoon. It was due in here at 5:49. And the incident happened at 6:05 p.m. this evening.
Was there any contact with the tower or any FAA officials in the flight control center over near the airport about any problems they were having approaching in the weather, in the thunderhead?
There may have been, but I'm not aware of any right now.
Delta officials say a temporary morgue has been set up in a Delta hangar at the airport. They will begin notifying the families of the survivors as soon as possible, but it's unclear so far how many have survived. The identity of the passengers and crew have not yet been released. No one knows for sure why Delta Flight 191 went down. It will take federal investigators days to search the scene to try to determine that. The crash of the L-1011 is the first major accident at DFW Airport in its 11-year history. Nan Goplerud, Channel 8 News, DFW Airport.
Delta Flight 191 from Fort Lauderdale arrived at the DFW area at a very bad time in very bad weather. Robert Braden of San Angelo was watching from the 10th floor of the nearby Marriott Hotel.
We was watching the weather and was watching airplanes and that, but this one started coming in real low. We thought it was going to hit the building on the other side of the bridge. As it got to the freeway over there, it hit a car and just wiped it out. When it did, it just threw the wing into a 45, and then when the wing hit, it just burst into a flame of fire. And we watched it come across the bridge over to here, and we seen it hit here, and when it hit here, it just, it just exploded, and then it went about 150 feet further, and we couldn't see no more what happened.
Anthony Rogers was driving west on Highway 114 when his car was struck by the plane.
The rain was so hard you couldn't see 30 foot in front of you, and all of a sudden it seemed like just caught a tire, a glimpse of a tire, and a big jolt just bounced my car. I turned back and I saw it looked like a big explosion right over there, the ball of fire and the mushroom cloud.
Another motorist wasn't so lucky. 28-year-old William Mayberry of Grapevine was killed when one of the plane's wings struck his car. After crossing Highway 114, the plane apparently bounced and then clipped a huge water tank on DFW's property. Then it exploded into a ball of fire. Hundreds of rescue workers rushed to the scene, and while most of the passengers were dead, they found others alive.
We had a water tower. I think it was a wind shear. Did you see any lightning? No.
A lot of screaming, a lot of yelling. You know, I don't know, you really can't explain it. You just got to, it's hard to imagine because you can see it on TV, but once you're in there, it's unreal.
The search for victims continued throughout the evening. Around 1 a.m., a crane was moved in to lift up part of the plane's undercarriage, and that's when the last bodies were removed from Delta Flight 191.
Members of the NTSB team and other officials met early this morning to coordinate the investigation. Among them were specialists in aircraft construction, air traffic control, and weather. The cause of the accident will not be officially determined for perhaps as long as 6 months, but conditions yesterday suggest weather may have played a role. Channel 8 Precision Radar indicated a very severe thunderstorm over the airport at the time of the crash. This is the type of storm that can cause severe wind downdrafts known as wind shear. Wind shear occurs when air cools rapidly beneath a thunderstorm and then rushes toward the ground. It can wreck even the largest aircraft. When a plane is on approach, as was the Delta flight yesterday, the wind burst can interfere with the airflow over the wing, causing the plane to lose speed and stability. Wind shear was found to be the cause of a New Orleans air disaster in 1982 and a New York crash in 1975. Following the New York accident, the Federal Aviation Administration required the installation of wind shear indicators at most major airports. This indicator is part of the system at DFW. Under normal conditions, controllers in the tower would have been alerted to wind shear by an alarm activated by the sensor. But the controllers would not have told a pilot to abort a landing. That is the pilot's decision. The time it takes to transmit the warning and data to a pilot could be critical. And the vice chairman of the NTSB says communication is the biggest drawback to the present warning system.
One of the things that troubles us is that although more information is now available to pilots, one of the problems is the information is frequently not in a form that is readily understandable in a quick situation that develops.
Large trucks started to arrive early this morning at the Dallas County Medical Examiner's office. Inside were the remains of the people who perished in the Delta jet crash. Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Charles Petty says 120 bodies have been recovered, 8 positively identified. But that is just the tip of the workload iceberg for the 60 staff members assigned to the grim task. Dr. Petty says most of the deaths were due to the impact of the crash, although there were many cases of burns. Dr. Petty also says help from families and friends is crucial in the identification process.
Most of the individuals that we have had a chance to process so far have no identification on them at all. You must realize at the time of a high impact crash such as we're dealing with here, the handbags of ladies are scattered all over, wallets are torn out of the pockets and are gone. We still need from the next of kin information such as dental records and photographs and where fingerprints might be, clothing, jewelry, etc., operative scars that will allow us to identify individuals.
20 of the injured survivors came to Parkland. 7 are being treated in the burn unit.
In a crash of this sort, with the tumbling and the shearing forces and everything else, the patients always are assumed to have broken backs and necks until they're proved otherwise. And the Dallas paramedics and the paramedics in Tarrant County and others did treat everyone as though they had a broken back. Indeed, 5 of the first 17 who came to Parkland did have broken back, neck injuries, and severe neurosurgical injuries, as well as intra-abdominal trauma and burns.
When a disaster of these proportions strikes, preparation is the key. But there was an unexpected turn of events last night. Hundreds of people flooded local blood banks to roll up their sleeves and donate blood for people they don't even know. Parkland reports over 500 units of blood were taken last night, and there is no shortage of blood for the patients under treatment. Large hospitals prepare for these tragedies by running simulations several times a year. Parkland officials say everything went well, and it was a community effort.
It's not just the hospital, that's where the patients are, but the people in the field. 2 of our young surgeons went out to the field for triage. The Dallas Fire Department paramedics did a wonderful job. I think that some people transported probably don't have severe neck injuries and cord injuries and paralysis as a result of the fact that we had people who knew what to do at the scene.
Ironically, the first realistic drill of a major air disaster in 1975 took place at DFW Airport in almost the exact location of last night's crash. Dennis Johnson, Channel 8 News.
Carol Christie and Susan Donahue have been waiting at Parkland Hospital since 9 o'clock last night, hoping to see their sister Kathy. Kathy Ford, a Fort Worth resident, is a crash survivor who was critically injured but is listed in stable condition at Parkland Hospital. Carol knew her sister was out of town on business but had no idea she was on Flight 191 from Fort Lauderdale. She and her children were watching news reports of the crash.
We have said from the beginning that before I even knew my sister was on the flight, my children and I said, we need to pray for those people on the plane. And then when we found out it was my sister, that's the first thing that came to my mind. And when we got here last night and sat down at the table, we all prayed together. And it's something that is a little uncommon for our family to do together. So really, when you come to something like that, God, there's nobody else to turn to.
There are 12 members of Kathy Ford's family waiting at the hospital, including her husband and 2 children.
We are just leaning on each other. We haven't left the hospital. We've been here since shortly after 9 last night. And we're just believing that she's going to get better.
Chaplains have been with the family around the clock. Kathy Ford's relatives spent the evening in the Parkland cafeteria with other families who were waiting to hear about their loved ones.
Families that were in the room with us last night, there were no survivors in those families. There were a couple of young boys beside us, and we did talk to them some, but they had lost a father, so we really almost felt guilty. But we feel very fortunate to have her. She's alive.
Peggy Waymeyer, Channel 8 News.
Does this bother you at all to be flying today after this plane crash?
No, it doesn't bother me one bit. I figure the one down for the week is here and the rest will be fine.
But it is on your mind?
No, I hadn't even thought about it, to tell you the truth.
I tried not to think about it. It didn't concern me till I saw the charred wreckage out there.
To be honest, we had to think about it a little bit before we got on the airplane, but and prayed about it too. But it's not it's one of those things you can't control. So no, not in the long run it doesn't. I think it's similar to driving upon an automobile accident. It makes you a little more cognizant of what's going on around you. But
the eerie sound of sirens filled the air around DFW Airport last night. Hundreds of emergency vehicles and crews rushed to the crash scene. Many were responding as part of the airport's official crash rescue plan. The most critical part of the plan is saving the survivors. Although there was some chaos and disorganization as ambulances and police poured in, officials on the scene and at area hospitals agree early response efforts went well.
We're very pleased with the response. We had enough physicians, we literally had to send them home, come in, stay over. Nurses stayed over, operating rooms were cleared, obstetricians gave up their operating rooms, medical intensive care units gave up their intensive care beds. Everything was mobilized and went as smooth as it can in this kind of catastrophe.
Officers also quickly took up their places on area roadways to try to keep traffic and curious onlookers moving. On a regular basis, DFW Airport simulates a crash, calling in agencies to practice for the tragedy that until yesterday hadn't happened here. Each has an assigned role to play. DPS Lieutenant Dwayne Cox says for the most part the planning and practice paid off.
The only thing that I may suggest in the future is the command post be established a little sooner and everyone be informed of where they're at.
Right now, I want everybody to back up. An airport lieutenant, back up. Cut some slack.
A few members of the media have complained the crash rescue plan for reporters and photographers did not allow them in as early as promised. And some authorities say too many ambulances and emergency personnel who were not part of the official plan caused extra confusion. But with the high temperatures and difficult work, the extra help was welcomed by those in charge. And had the jumbo jet carried a full passenger load, officials say they would have needed the extra manpower. DFW officials have not been available yet today to discuss the successes and failures of their crash rescue plan. Now that DFW Airport has experienced its first major disaster, the rescue plans will be discussed and reevaluated. So should this ever happen again, they will be even better prepared. Nan Goplerud, Channel 8 News, DFW Airport.
24 hours after it tried to land at DFW Airport, this is what's left of Delta Flight 191. Reporters and photographers were allowed in for a closer look at the crash site this afternoon. Airport spokesman Joe Dealey summed up what they saw.
Virtually total destruction.
The most recognizable part of the plane is the tail section. That's where most of the 31 survivors were sitting. The rest of the plane hardly looks like a plane anymore. And workers searched the wreckage looking for anything which would help identify the victims or help explain how and why the crash happened. The L-1011 jumbo jet was trying to land shortly after 6 o'clock last night in a violent thunderstorm. The plane hit 2 cars on Highway 114. One of them belonged to Anthony Rogers.
I was headed west on 114, and the rain was so hard you couldn't see 30 foot in front of you. And all of a sudden, it seemed like just caught a tire, a glimpse of a tire, and a big jolt just bounced my car.
The other driver wasn't so lucky. 28-year-old William Mayberry of Grapevine was killed. His car was demolished. The plane then bounced off the highway and crashed into a water tank on airport property. Then it skidded across the tarmac and exploded. The plane wound up facing the same highway it had just crossed. Some witnesses say lightning hit the plane. Others speculate a wind shear might have caused the accident. But the head of the National Transportation Safety Board team, which is investigating the crash, says it was the pilot's decision to fly into the storm.
The decision as to whether to land or not to land is the pilot's decision. And some pilots will take a wave off when others won't, but some of us will take a turn around a curve at 25 miles an hour, and some of us will take it at 30, and it's a matter of judgment.
Today, Governor Mark White toured the crash site and visited the families of survivors.
Devastation is enormous, and it's truly a miracle that anyone survived. I know that talked to some of the families of the survivors, and we were exerting every bit of medical care that can be given to those people to see that they will have a successful recovery. I've also have visited with some of the families of those who lost their loved ones here and let them know that we would do whatever we could to help support them in this difficult time.
And then investigators for the National Transportation Safety Board began the process of trying to find out what went wrong.
We start to document the wreckage, where it was located, what its condition was when it came to rest, what it might tell us about the way the aircraft was configured at the time of the accident. We will also look at aircraft systems, hydraulic, electrical systems, do whatever else we think might be productive.
And Furman says it may take a week to search the crash site to help determine what caused the worst commercial airline crash in Texas history. Dave Cassidy, Channel 8 News at DFW Airport.
Wind shear occurs when the air below a thunderstorm is rapidly cooled by falling rain. The air rushes down, spreading in all directions as it hits the ground. The wind can be severe enough to down even the largest planes, including the L-1011 wide-body jet. A plane on landing may typically travel down its glide slope at 170 knots. The airflow would be a headwind, with air rushing over the wings, giving the plane lift. In a wind shear, the airspeed can drop suddenly to perhaps 110 knots because the airflow has suddenly reversed to a tailwind, disrupting the airflow over the wing, causing the plane to lose lift and stability. At low altitude, there is little chance to recover. Wind shear was blamed for the crash of a 727 near New Orleans in 1982. It was also named as the cause of a 1975 air disaster in New York. After the New York crash, the Federal Aviation Administration ordered low-level wind shear indicators for most major airports. This is part of the system at DFW. Under normal operating conditions, the sensors would detect the violent wind shifts, and traffic controllers in the tower would be alerted by an alarm. The controllers would then tell the pilot about wind shear data, and it would be the pilot's decision whether to attempt landing. This communication takes time, and the vice chairman of the NTSB says the relaying of data is the biggest problem with the current system.
There are a variety through what we call this low-level wind shear alert system makes available to the tower to be passed on to the pilot the wind velocity and direction and various quadrants of the airport. But in the quick-moving situation of a storm, we have found at some cases this information, although available and passed on, is done so rapidly that it's very hard for the pilot to assimilate.
The flight recorders, often referred to as black boxes, will be studied by a team of a dozen experts at the National Transportation Safety Board in Washington, D.C. At a press briefing this afternoon, NTSB officials displayed 3 of the boxes recovered from Delta Flight 191. The devices were located in the L-1011's tail section. Officials say because of that position, the boxes emerged in excellent condition. One of the boxes contains voice conversations between the cockpit crew. The other contains data about the position of the plane moments before impact.
It should tell us not only the altitude, airspeed, heading, and accelerations of the airplane, but the flight control positions and engine thrust and the configuration of the airplane.
Investigators will study the data to determine if the crew followed all the necessary checklists. The technical data should show if the Delta jet was performing according to its design, and most important, whether it came under the influence of low-level wind shear.
The information in both of these recorders will be put together by an airplane performance group and analyzed by the airplane performance group and the human performance group. So we will have an extensive analysis of all these data.
Inside the Delta terminal, it appeared to be a normal Saturday morning as passengers made their way to the gates. Most appeared calm and unconcerned, but it was obvious Flight 191 was on their minds.
I try not to think about it.
Passenger Susan Eccles is stopping over at DFW on her way to Reno.
It didn't concern me till I saw the charred wreckage out there. I was just thinking psychologically it wasn't a good thing for someone to see.
Some passengers were hesitant to fly.
Well, to be honest, we had to think about it a little bit before we got on the airplane, but and prayed about it too. But it's not any one. It's one of those things you can't control.
Others seemed unconcerned.
No, it doesn't bother me one bit. I figure the one down for the week is here, and the rest will be fine.
But it is on your mind.
No, I hadn't even thought about it, to tell you the truth.
That was apparently the attitude of most passengers. Few reservations were canceled.
As far as we can tell, there has not been a lot of inquiry on the telephone by a concerned public, as there should be, but nothing that you could say there is any kind of a movement to cancel air transportation as a result.
Still, Delta employees were left to deal with the tragedy. There were grim looks on the faces of pilots as they headed for their planes. Delta employees have flown into DFW from all over the country, just to be here for our friends, one employee said. This young woman is a Delta marketing agent. She lost a friend on Flight 191, and she was waiting for the arrival of his family. And by mid-morning, relatives of the victims had begun arriving. There were long embraces and tearful eyes. The relatives have come here to help identify the victims. They'll be doing that by telephone with the medical examiner, describing clothing, jewelry, and other personal effects in an effort to make the grim identification job much easier. Mike Capps, Channel 8 News, DFW Airport.
There's people here, there are wonderful people here from all over. The hospitals, it's absolutely overwhelming. It just goes to show you what a great city this is, because people do come to the aid of everyone.
They were people listening to radios, vacationers passing through town from Midland and Wichita, Kansas, and some passengers at DFW Airport hopped a cab to the blood donor centers. This was crowd control not expected by the Dallas police, but it was a bright spot in an otherwise tragic weekend. Last night, 590 units of blood were received. Well over 100 units came in this morning. A 21-year veteran of the blood center said, "I've never seen anything like it. The old record for donations was 300 units. Even more amazing was the news that only 28 units of blood were used among 5 patients. More survivors would have changed that." Shortly after 6:30 last night, Parkland activated the mass casualty plan. Doctors, nurses, and other medical personnel have practiced it many times, but now it was for real. First reports put the number of possible incoming injured at 20 to 60. Sadly, the low estimate was correct. Terry Gale was supposed to be off last night, but that quickly changed. Soon she and her colleagues were in the middle of high-pressure medical care, where every second counts. The impact of what she saw last night was etched in her eyes today. She says feelings of depression won't be unusual.
Just real sad that it couldn't have turned out, different for some of the others.
In that sense, you wish there had been more patients brought in?
Yes. More survivors.
And once she gets some sleep, there will be time to decompress.
By sharing it with the people that I work with, some people, it's real hard for them to understand this, but we all have a sense of family here.
Because of the number of fatalities, Parkland really didn't see that many patients, only 20 in all. Dr. Irwin Thal is a trauma surgeon, a person used to unpleasant situations. He too was touched by last night's events, especially the carnage trucked in from the airport.
I was over at the Forensic Science Building earlier today, and I think that probably made a more lasting impression on me than what we see. But having seen the other side of it, it was devastating. I'm sure we're all going to probably reflect ourselves. We suddenly realize that what life is all about. You're sort of living on a shoestring.
Dennis Johnson, Channel 8 News.
I think it would take something this traumatic when you have, 27 survivors out of 180 flyers, 172 that, no, I'd say it's not fully sunk in.
Survivor John Moore doesn't yet know all the details of the crash of Flight 191, but today he wanted to let people know what happened to him. He asked that no cameras be present at the interview because of burns suffered to his face.
The rest of the plane is severed. Those of us in the back section are all that's left, and there are a few hanging, and I was able to undo my seatbelt, drop to the ground. At that point I knew I was either one of two places. Either was in heaven, or I'd come back to Earth. And I said, well, I'm going to find out by unbuckling my seatbelt.
Psychiatrists say it's beneficial for disaster victims like John Moore to retell their stories. And today, members of the American Psychiatric Association announced they will volunteer their services to victims of the crash. Experts say talking about the experience helps victims overcome the feelings of denial and depression, which doctors call post-traumatic stress syndrome.
This was a recognized entity in Vietnam veterans and some shell shock in World War II, in which someone ostensibly seems normal, copes fairly, jokes, and in some way begins to have intrusive nightmares, recurrent dreams, hyper example of startle reflex, and then at that particular point sort of comes unglued.
Counselors have already met with some victims, and once they return to their homes across the country, survivors and their families will continue to be monitored by psychiatrists. Experts say people who have been touched by such a disaster must prepare themselves for the psychological symptoms, which may not show up until many months later. Chris Connor, Channel 8 News.
Atlanta-based pilots of Flight 191 are not listed as known survivors. Captain Edward M. Connors, First Officer Rudy P. Prince.
Today, the flashing lights were gone. Law enforcement officials quietly stood in the area cordoned off around the wreckage. Television news crews recorded the day's activities. It was all in sharp contrast to the hustle and rush last night of hundreds of emergency crews pouring into the area. Many of the rescue workers reported as part of the airport's official crash rescue operation. The first step of that complex plan is to save the survivors. Overall, officials say those efforts went smoothly.
There was a jam of emergency ambulance units that made it very difficult to move casualties and fatalities away from the crash site. But after the early phases of the crash fire rescue operation and more positive control was effected, the plan worked as planned.
Never before has DFW Airport had a tragedy of this size. But through the airport's 11-year history, officials have practiced and trained for this type of accident. DPS Lieutenant Dwayne Cox says for the most part, the planning paid off.
The only thing that I may suggest in the future is the command post be established a little sooner and everyone be informed of where they're at.
A few members of the media have complained the crash rescue plan kept reporters and photographers out of the scene longer than promised. And although officers quickly took their places directing traffic and trying to keep onlookers out, airport officials say they were caught by surprise by the traffic jam. It's one area they will reassess. Another is the number of extra volunteer crews responding, which created some chaos. But with the hot weather, the reinforcements were welcome. And had the plane been full, the extra manpower would have been needed.
If this had been in a housing area, it'd been an entirely different ball game. And if you try to chide people for too much response, and the next time they might stay away and you need them.
Catholic and Anglican priests worked into the night administering last rites to the victims of Flight 191. As survivors were wheeled into area emergency rooms, chaplains waited inside to comfort and encourage. Every family who came to Parkland for information on their loved ones was assigned a chaplain. Kate Lehman has been with survivor Kathy Ford's family.
The chaplains never left us, and there was usually more than one with us. The whole time. We're so emotionally involved. It's nice to have someone from the outside there to say, hey, you know, everything's all right. Spiritually as well as physically.
We use our own judgment and sort of see how the people are holding up, and if the family members seem strong, like these people do, I just sit with them. If they want to talk and tell me what's going on, then that's my role. I listen.
Some chaplains, like Peggy Anderson, simply answer phone calls and have the difficult job of breaking the news to family members who have just heard about the crash.
I'm sorry, your person was listed as admitted or not, or was a victim? Let me check the list, all right? Because if they're not on this list, then we do assume that they were victims.
The caller waited silently as the chaplain ran down the list of survivors looking for his niece's name.
I'm very sorry, but it does look as if she has not been listed as being one of the people admitted.
It's very sad because many of the victims will not be able to be identified, and we're not allowing families to view the body, so there's really nothing for them to grasp onto. It's sort of the unknown.
Dina Vogus was one of the first to meet family members when they entered Parkland last night.
Most of them were in shock. They were numb. They had not reached the point of being able to hope or cry or whatever. Some of them were angry, but mostly shock.
The chaplains know that despite all they've done to help, it may be days or even months before family members can grapple with the reality of this tragedy. Peggy Waymeyer, Channel 8 News.
One evening in 1975, a 727 passenger jet en route to New York's Kennedy Airport crashed in a heavy storm. It was later learned that the flight was hit with a sudden severe downdraft of wind known as wind shear. After that crash, the Federal Aviation Administration required wind shear indicators like this one at most U.S. airports. This indicator is at DFW International. The FAA has not yet released the wind shear data developed by the instruments at the time of this evening's crash. But Channel 8 precision radar at the time of the accident indicates a very heavy thunderstorm right over the airport. This is the kind of storm that can generate the sudden wind shear drafts. If the aircraft was hit by wind shear, it came at the moment when the plane was most vulnerable. As it was landing, its engines throttled back, its altitude very low.